Okay. Okay, people, here we are again. Did you do your homework? Did you notice you're still alive? Because we just assume it's true we're alive, but we realize impermanence, it's a surprise there's still petrol in the tank, you know? Can I have that cushion, darling, behind my back? The round one. Yeah. So it's a really good practice to remember impermanence, because one of the misconceptions in our mind is that we assume we're permanent. So we take ourselves for granted, you know. It's a bit like you get in the car and the gas meter doesn't work and you just assume there's gas there. That's foolish. You know it is. It's idiotic, because you know every time you drive, you're using up the gas. So you never know if there's going to be any gas left. When you turn the engine on, it still goes. You go, wow, I can't believe it. There's still gas in the tank. That's how we should feel. And the gas in the tank is our past virtuous karma of particularly non-harming, more specifically non-killing. That's what keeps us alive, quite literally. Not youth, not health. It's our past merit. So we remember that, and they're amazing. I'm still alive. I'm going to make the most of today. So we think like that as our starting point. And then we think, we're sitting here together today, listen, think, analyze, contemplate, internalize, and I'm listening too, even though the words are coming out of my mouth. I promise I'm listening. So helpful to me to see if there's some tools we can take, some insights we can get that we can use in our life to continue this job of this work in progress, this person that we're developing into a Buddha, so we can be a benefit to others. That's why we're here. So, Mary, you're the, so put on the refuge prayer, darling. We'll just sing it together. We'll say the words in English. We'll say it in Tibetan. I'll say one time in English, and I'll make the words a little bit more, and then we do it 2 times in Tibetan. So we're saying, here we are together, listening to these teachings until, until we are enlightened, we're going to rely upon the Buddha Dhamma Sangha. That's assuming we are already Buddhists. If you're not, then you don't say that. You don't have to. And then secondly, we're saying, you know, by the virtuous karma we create by listening to these teachings, may we become a Buddha. No matter how long it takes, doesn't matter. So we can be a benefit to sentient beings. Thinking like that as we sing 2 times in Tibetan. Sangye charang soke chognam la jangshu baru dagni kyap suchi dagi chernyen gi personam ki drola penchir sangye drupa shog sangye charang soke chognam la jangshu baru dagni kyap suchi dagi chernyen gi personam ki drola penchir sangye drupa shog. Thanks, Mary. Okay, so let's summarize yesterday, and then we'll continue today. So yesterday and Friday, I tried to make the point, tried to show how these teachings on compassion are in a bigger picture, the big picture, give some context, but it's and how crucial it is in order to understand the level of compassion that this Mahayana Buddhist path is describing. Because on the face of it, it's outrageous. Buddha's telling us that actually we have the potential to have incredible compassion, and in fact, incredible love. Compassion is may you not suffer. Love is may you be happy. They're the essence of all the virtues. That we've got that potential to have those for every living being. And that's shocking. This is not how we think. You mean the pedophiles? You mean the ex-husband? You mean the mean, ugly people? It doesn't make sense, you know. So that's why we must understand what the Buddha's definition of suffering. Because if compassion is, may you know, oh my God, look at that suffering, I'm so sorry. You got to know what he means by suffering. And that's what you get back in the earlier levels of practice in this packaging of Buddha's teachings. The first level of practice, the nuts and bolts of Buddha's teachings about karma and the mind and the Four Noble Truths. The very first one is there is suffering. And there are 3 levels. And we've only really looked at the grosser level. You know, the more subtle levels, we haven't gone into those now. And it's okay. But there are 3 levels of suffering. And the first one, which is the only one we posit, which is when the bad things happen, basically. When we understand the subtler ones, the second one is the suffering of change. And that is, shockingly enough, what we refer to as happiness. So basically, when the bad things happen is what we call suffering. And when the good things happen is what we call happiness. And at one level, That's not wrong. Buddha would agree, but he's got a subtle, more nuanced understanding of these things. And he would say that even the happiness we have, which is when the good things happen, because it's based on attachment, it's faulty and it doesn't last. Now, we know things don't last, and but we want them to last, which is why we're devastated when they don't, when the happiness doesn't last. But he's giving his logical reasons for why it doesn't last. And then the most subtle level of suffering, which he refers to as all pervasive suffering or conditioned suffering. This is quite hard for us to understand. So all the Buddha's teachings in this entire packaging are in relation to how you cease those three levels of suffering and their causes. The first one, you stop the gross level of suffering by stopping harming others. So in other words, if you don't want future suffering, Buddha says stop causing it. Just like your doctor says, if you don't want diabetes, well, stop causing it. If you don't want cancer, stop causing it. So if you don't want future suffering, and this is the view, taking the view that our consciousness comes from before and continues into the future, which is a fundamental hypothesis in all of these teachings. And if you don't want future suffering, it's in your hands, honey. You don't cause it. And what causes it? Killing, stealing, lying, harming, bad-mouthing, etc. Hardly complicated. So you refrain from those. That's the very first level, entry level of practice. Abide by the laws of karma. Consequence of that, your lack of suffering. So therefore, to some degree, some happiness. Now, you've got the second level, and you've got to go to the next level of practice, and you start to get rid of the suffering of change. And that's about getting up attachment, giving up attachment. We haven't gone into that. Giving up attachment. And then finally, getting rid of the subtlest level of suffering, all pervasive suffering, by realizing emptiness. So all the techniques are there, all structured, all laid out. So having some reasonable, even intellectual understanding of this entire package is crucial. You know, we don't think of compassion like that. You know, we think, well, yes, I've got compassion. I see all the suffering people. That's fine. But we've got to see it in the bigger picture point of view in order to really know how to develop it and to develop this courageous attitude of a bodhisattva. A person who, once you've accomplished this level of bodhicitta, which is the culmination of these levels of compassion and love, which is the result of developing the wisdom wing first, the first levels, it's all structured. You know, now you've got this extraordinary, you've made this paradigm shift in your mind when now only others are your concern. That's a pretty developed level and a shocking one because it doesn't fit in our world at all. In fact, it sounds like mental illness. You know, it just sounds like wrong. So we've got to get the context. Another way of framing it, like I said yesterday, is, you know, the first stages of practice, and this is not the Buddhist term, we use it. That's the practice of self-compassion. And it's surprising, it's not just going to having a sleep and a weep and a good massage. That's nothing wrong. It's the giving up of the rubbish in your mind, which is the source of your pain, and learning to abide by the laws of karma. It sounds kind of punitive initially because we have the wrong view about it. It seems like all punishment and reward. But Buddha says we produced ourselves. Buddha says we come into this life programmed with our own tendencies. And this is the shocking part. If we're a materialist, a philosophical materialist, then we know we come into this life programmed, but with mummies and daddies and grandmas and grandpas' tendencies. But the Buddha says, no, you come into this life programmed with your own tendencies. That's the radical difference. And that brings in the view of karma. So I thought, out of interest, just as we are discussing, it's not the actual explicit topic, there's no harm in going into karma a little bit today as a basis for this, understanding how we have compassion for others. Because this so-called self-compassion, which they call renunciation, is the giving up of suffering and its causes. But really, it's the practice of having compassion for yourself because you're sick of suffering. You're fed up with suffering. You've got to have this feeling of being fed up by suffering. And that brings the practices, which are the actual practice of being compassionate towards yourself, stopping harming others, abiding by the laws of karma, living good ethics. And then you go more deeply into your mind itself and you unpack and unravel your mind and begin to distinguish between the neurotic states of mind and the virtuous ones. That's the essence, actually, of being a Buddhist. Being your own therapist, as Lama puts it. That really is self-compassion. Because you're sick of your own suffering. So then, well, once we do that, we'll go a bit in karma, I think, a bit. And then we can go further in those 8 verses. And we can describe, we can go to the sixth verse, I think, the 7th and 8th, maybe it's the 7th and 8th. And that's where the practice of Tong Len, someone mentioned yesterday, giving, taking. This is the essence. This is the actual practice that culminates in that paradigm shift that becomes bodhicitta, where now others are your concern, like a mother for her child, except the whole world are your children. And then finally, the other verse is about how to see everything as illusory, which brings us into emptiness. So we'll discuss that too. Okay, so the Four Noble Truths. Okay, this is back in, as we know in the Lam Rim, the terminology that's used for this structure, it's divided into 3 sections. And as Rinpoche, respecting the lineage, medieval language, respecting the lineage, would say that the first level of practice are the teachings and practices suitable to the disciple of the least capability. Well, it's a very fancy phrase for what I would prefer to call junior school. We know that phrase. It's fairly cliched, but we know what the meaning. What are we doing there? Oh, the 8 verses, thank you. Not yet. We don't need the verses yet. And I'd rather see the people from my point of view. I'd rather see the people. I'll tell you when we need the verses later, Mary. Thank you, darling. Okay, so we've got junior school, then the second scope of practice, or they sometimes refer to them as scopes, the scope, the level of capability. And this is like in anything you learn. When you go learn music, you start at the lowest one, you get to the middle one, you go to the advanced one. And this is where this fits beautifully with this analogy that I use repeatedly, that the bird needs 2 wings, wisdom and compassion. So the wisdom wing is the first and second scopes. The teachings and practices suitable to the disciple of the least capability and of the middle capability. I prefer to call junior school and high school. So these are the teachings that we share with the Theravadan path, the Hinayana teachings of Lord Buddha. And they're the ones that focus totally on you. There's no discussion of compassion here. There's no discussion of other people. This is the stuff that you do for yourself to help you get rid of your suffering and to help you develop your amazing potential. It's like the retreat mode, really. Then you've got the compassion wing. That's the great scope. That's university. That's compassion. Now you can help others. It makes sense. So it's surprising to us because we think compassion is the entry point into spiritual teachings. For the Buddha, it's a more advanced one. The first one is compassion for yourself. Put yourself together first. Then you can help others. It's very logical. So the Four Noble Truths are basically a way of presenting the wisdom. And it's Buddha's presentation from his own experience of 1, there is suffering. What it is, he explains the 3 levels. 2, there are causes. 3, there is the state, this is how they say it, the state of cessation of suffering and its causes. In other words, you can get rid of suffering and its causes. And 4, how to do it. Essentially, that's it. And it's Buddha's first teaching. He sat under that tree after years and years of all his practice, leaving his kingdom, going off into the forest, joining all these amazing, these previous great yogis and scholars, studying as far as they go, meditating, moving forward, and then eventually under the tree, they talk about in Bodh Gaya, he finally cut the root of all the nonsense and achieved his own perfection. And then he started teaching. He was about 29 when that happened, I think, or 30 or something. And then he traveled for the rest of his life until he passed away at 80. So that was in Bodh Gaya, in what's the state called? Bihar. So then he walked a few hours, a few days actually. We do this pilgrimage. We're doing this pilgrimage every day. This is a commercial break. Told with the same voice, you can't tell the difference. It's now a commercial break. I'm taking the opportunity. It's since 2000. It started, this pilgrimage we did, it started here in Santa Fe. And my friend Peggy from San Francisco, who's the lawyer for the, what's that motorbike company? Famous one. Harley. Yeah, Harley Davidson. She was then, I don't know if she's now their lawyer. And she was on her Harley and she took me for a ride. And she said, why don't you go? And I was running the prison project then. And she said, why don't you lead a pilgrimage to India to raise money for the prison project? And that's when it started. We've been doing them now since 2000. 2001. So we now do this other one. We go up trekking to Lama Zopa's cave. That raises money for Lama Zopa's cave, but the pilgrimage raised money for the prison project and still does. So we go to these holy places, and I really tell you, it's so special. I've done about 25 of them. I never get fed up with them. They're incredible. We go to the holy places, so we go to Bodh Gaya. That's where he got enlightened. But we go to where he got born. Then we drive, from Kathmandu, we take a plane to Lumbini, where he got born. Then we go drive 8-10 hours on these buses, these wonderful buses we take with these wonderful Indian drivers, so gorgeous. We go to where he spent his years, his rainy season retreats with his disciples, Shravasti, very special. Then we drive to where he passed away, Kushinagar. I love that place. Then we drive to where he got enlightened. No, where he taught the Heart Sutra, Rajgriha. And there we go to when he got enlightened, Bodh Gaya. And then we drive finally to Varanasi, which is where he gave his first teaching. So he walked, we drive, he walked. We take about 8 hours on the bus. And that's where he taught in Deer Park, this beautiful spot that was given to him by some local person, where he gave his first teaching on the heart, the Four Noble Truths. So essentially, it's his presentation of the Hinayana path. It's essentially it's his practice of the nuts and bolts of the first and second scopes of how you can get rid of your suffering and causes and achieve your liberation, your cessation of suffering, your nirvana. And then the compassion wing is the Mahayana component, where you now see, oh my God, we're all in the same boat. How can I not help others? So the first noble truth, there is suffering. There are 3 levels. First one, he calls it the suffering of suffering. And as I said, very simply, it's when the bad things happen. Second, he calls the second one the suffering of change, which sounds kind of boring. But I think we should discuss a little bit here. It's important. So this is where we get to understand attachment. This is more subtle. But the shocking part is very simply, it is what we call happiness, which is when the nice things happen. But the third one's even more abstract, like I said, and we'll try. When we talk about emptiness, I'll go into that one. It's all pervasive suffering. Okay, so then he describes those. Then he goes into the second one, the causes. So I said that briefly on Friday night, I think. So we all know actually the law of cause and effect runs the universe. We know it. We're called scientists, and we're brilliant at that. We know exactly what you need to put together, the thousands of causes you need to put together to get a really good working picture. It's ingenious, and you have to be precise, utterly precise. Well, this is what's interesting. That level of clarity and precision and depth of analysis is exactly what Buddha says we have to apply to understand suffering and its causes. He's got that same level of precision, and his understanding of the law of cause and effect in terms of is how to make a happy person and how to make a suffering person. That's his reference, not how to make computers and tablecloths. But the same principles apply. You have to know what the thing is that you want to develop, want to. But like if you're going to talk about a suffering person, you've got to know what suffering is. You've got to know what the causes are, and then you have to know that you don't want it. So you have to then know how to get rid of it. So you all know if you've got a problem, you have to locate the problem precisely, and then you have to identify precisely the causes, and it's only then that you can get rid of the problem. We know that. That's the Four Noble Truths in terms of suffering. So, of course, we have to understand Buddha's views because they're very, very different. The assumptions here, which we have to take as our working hypothesis, otherwise Buddhism is a load of rubbish. If you take it from the perspective of a Christian, it's a load of rubbish. If you take it from the perspective of a materialist, it's a load of rubbish. So you've got to take Buddha's view. That means the fundamental thing that's assumed here is this view of the Buddhas about what the mind is. Mind and consciousness, they're used synonymously for the Buddha. They're necessarily not physical. Already a shock. They're not the brain. They're not a function of the brain. They work the grosser level absolutely works interdependently, inextricably with the brain. No contradiction. So like I always say, without insulting neuroscientists, you would say at least the grosser level of consciousness, was the point I'm about to make too, is that Buddha would assert much subtler levels of our capacity for cognition, which is what mind is. And we do not posit these in the modern world. in neuroscience. So without insulting neuroscientists, I would say that the brain is a physical indicator of what is going on in the mind at a grosser level. And there's nothing wrong with saying that. It's a good way to put it. So mind and consciousness, like I said a bit yesterday too, mind for the Buddha is not physical. There are trillions upon trillions upon trillions of mind possessors, which is the great term in Tibetan, sentient, which we translate as sentient being. I rather like that, mind possessor. So remember, mind and consciousness are virtually synonymous. And they're necessarily referring to the non-physicality, the non-physical part of you. So whatever is not physical within you, which is your thoughts, your feelings, your emotions, unconscious, subconscious, instinct, intuition, this entire spectrum of your inner being, that's your mind or your consciousness, and it is not physical. That's the major difference. Now, you could say that he at least agrees with something there with the Christians. They say there is something not physical, but they call it a soul. The Hindus call it an atman, a self. And that's where Buddha diverges in his own direction, away from the Hindus. He went so far in his investigation of the nature of self, as His Holiness the Dalai Lama tells us. It was these amazing Indians more than 3,000 years ago who began the investigation of the nature of self. It wasn't, to our surprise, Mr. Freud, 3,000 years ago plus. Buddha went as far as he could go, and then he diverged in his own direction, specifically in relation to his own direct experiential findings about the nature of self. So mind or consciousness is not the same as self. Self is a name we give to a person. We'll go into all that later. We'll talk about emptiness. So mind or consciousness is we are made of physical, and we're made of the mental. That's it. And so, as I said, in the Vajrayana model, the more esoteric teachings in Buddhism, which I taught in detail in Tibetan Buddhism, and come from India, the physical world is made of the 4 elements. They still use that model, And our body and our mind are inextricably linked. We've got gross body, which is this bag of bones, inextricably linked with the gross consciousness, which is the sensory. Then when that ceases, and that's the time of death, there's 8 stages of death, the way they describe it. By the time you stop breathing, which is what we think is death, but you're not dead yet, but your gross consciousness has ceased, your sensory, and certain levels of your own conceptuality. But now you're more subtle level, you've got subtle consciousness. And that's inextricably linked to a subtler level of physicality. Different, and that described in detail in the Vajrayana. And you've got very subtle consciousness, the subtlest level, which is what then, when that mind leaves the body, which is often 3 days after you stop breathing, that's the level of your consciousness, this so-called very subtle, that leaves the body, carrying with it all the karmic imprints, all the seeds, all the tendencies of our past practices, our past tendencies, our past tendencies or actions of body, speech, and mind. This is the process of karma. Nothing goes astray. So the Buddhist view of karma is that it's the law that runs the universe. It's the law within which the universe runs, you can put it that way. And this is the crucial thing to continually remember. It's not made up by the Buddha. As I said, that story yesterday that mentioned that fellow in New Zealand who revealed the teachings to the Buddha. And I said, well, who revealed the teachings to Einstein? And of course, people laugh because we know nobody did. He used his noggin and he presents his findings. That's Buddha. That's the point. That's the entire point. You mightn't like what Buddha says. You might think he's a maniac. That's not the point. But that's the way to hear. It's not revelation. It's not from on high. It's not like God. It's not like a creator. There's no you like that. We have to stress that repeatedly for us materialists, or us who have other religious views, because because we hear it in the same way. Well, Buddha's an alternative to God. He says, don't do this and don't do that, and he'll punish you if you're naughty. No, there's no punisher and there's no rewarder. The key point in Buddhism is that we produce ourselves. It's a shocking concept, but very delicious. This is Holiness calls karma self-creation. So consciousness, therefore, what is it? Consciousness is not physical. It's not the function of the brain. This is the other crucial point. It is not the handiwork of anyone else. So if we're Christian, that's fine. If people don't have religious views, that's fine. You're quite happy with that. There's no creator. But the other one that's shocking is that it's not coming. Your mind doesn't come from your parents. This is so shocking for us because all our neuroscience, your brain for certain comes from your parents. It's obvious. But your tendencies are in your mind, which will join with the brain. So you come into this live program with your tendencies, and then they conjoin with that physical body that you do get from your parents, but you don't get your mind from your parents. This is so fundamental to the entire Buddhist approach, and therefore fundamental to the way you practice and your view of life. And it takes time to think about. You've got to squeeze your brain, as Lama says, to think this through. And the clear implication of this, of course, experientially, is that you own responsibility. You own those tendencies that you brought into this life. Your tendency to be good at music, good at math, or good at murder. That's what comes from the view of karma, the heart one. It's your tendencies, it's your mind, it's your love, it's your intelligence, it's your kindness, it's your attachment, it's your anger, it's your depression. This is a huge point, and this is what's implied by this idea that your mind is not physical and that it's not the handiwork of someone else, and that it therefore comes from before, because nothing can come from nothing. It can't just pop up out of nowhere, you know. It's a cause and effect. If you track back just this cup, you know, where did that come from? It came from stuff, which came from that, which came from that, which came from that. And you say, well, you're always thinking, well, where did the cup begin? You've got to get back. You've got to get back to the first Big Bang. You've got no choice. And then what about before the Big Bang? This is Dalai Lama said in all his conversations with Buddhists, with scientists, Big Bang, no problem. Just not the first Big Bang, that's all. So if you follow this logically, you're not going to find the first moment of this cup. You can't. Because if you do, that's the first cause. And the Christians are not being rude about the Christians. I loved being a Catholic. It's a philosophical point. They say you can have a first cause, which is what God is. Buddha says it's just not viable. And for the Buddha, you know, I always say this in very rude ways and it's a bit shocking. It's a bizarre idea that someone can give you a mind. It's kind of plain nutty. Your mother can't give you anger. She can beat you every day. But if you don't have a tendency to be angry in your mind, you won't get angry. You'll get other things. You'll get hurt. You'll have blood. You might have fear, but you won't have anger. It's got to be in your mind. Like my mother's a musician. And she could see that her little Bobsy, you know, was good at music. So she taught me. So naturally we would say, oh, Robina gets her music from her mother. No, she doesn't. Robina, my mother was good at music because she must have practiced it before and so brought it with her. I must have practiced it before and I brought it with me. And due to virtuous karma, I was born to a mummy who could help nourish my music. But I had to have the tendency in my mind. She could teach me music till the cows come home. If I don't have a tendency to be good at music, I would never learn music. So this is the concept of karma. We come into this life programmed. Like I said yesterday, there's 4 ways. We'll go into detail over here. There's 4 ways in which our past actions, I've heard that the word karma kind of refers to the word action. Not sure, I don't know. So there's every millisecond of what we think and do and say, every millisecond of what we think and do and say necessarily programs our mind. Buddha would have liked that concept. Sows seeds in the mind. And necessarily seeds bring fruits. So every millisecond of what we think and do and say sows seeds in our mind. And then when all the conditions ripen in the future, and that can be a long-term future or short-term future, the fruits will ripen. So there's 4 types of fruits. 4 ways in which our past actions ripen in the present. The first one is the type of body we get, the type of realm of existence into which we're born. So we, in our case, human. And this is described in detail in the death process, about the time before you stop breathing. You've got this, and I've used karmic as an analogy, karmic bank vaults. Everything you think and do and say drops seeds into your bank vaults. And there's 4 roughly. One is the fully ripened result. A complete action is one that brings a fully ripened result, which means a type of rebirth. So in our case, before we stop breathing, certain conditions triggered kind of the opening of that bank vault, and one of our non-harming, specifically non-killing karmic seeds, particularly practiced probably in the context of a spiritual path, even more precisely, as Lama Zopa says, practice in the context of keeping vows of non-killing, which makes it very rich and delicious, would have been triggered, which at that point already before we even stopped breathing, not more than 7 weeks, not more than a few weeks before we found our way to our present mother's fallopian tube. Or the Petri dish these days. It's different. Now, maybe not the Petri dish. There's just big discussions about that among the scholars. They say, some people say that the egg and the sperm come together in the Petri dish, but the consciousness can only join that egg and sperm once it goes into the fallopian tube. Other scholars, I've talked to different geshis, and they say, no, it can join the egg and sperm in the Petri dish, which is interesting. Who knows? So, as Buddha's saying, every millisecond what we think and do and say. So one of our virtuous karmic seeds of non-killing was triggered before we even stopped breathing. And that already programmed us, set us up to get born, in my case, to my mother, Agnes Bliss, who was married to Teddy Courtin, my daddy. They hopped into bed, presumably, later on. They're not thinking of me yet, but a few weeks before I was conceived, this already was programmed. This is the thing about there's no creator involved, and there's no, your mummy and daddy don't make you. They just had sex. That's the best they did. But before that, even a few weeks before, the karmic seed that was triggered, a non-killing karmic seed that programmed me to be born to that particular mother and father due to intense past history with each other. At the same time, the other three bank vaults were triggered, if you like, and so the next lot, already those seeds would have been programmed to ripen as my tendencies. The next way karma ripens is as your tendencies. So you've got Hitler and you have Mother Teresa, haven't you? So clearly the difference is not their bodies. They've both got legs and arms and, flesh and bones. The difference is the next one. This next track of karma is their tendencies in their minds. And that basically is a bunch of habits. So clearly Mother Teresa came in with quite a few decent habits, and Mr. Hitler came with a few wacky ones. It's fairly evident. Can't blame poor old Hitler's Austrian mother, housewife mother, for Hitler. It's ridiculous. He came with his own tendencies, and she had some karma. He had this wacko kid, So the second karmic seed is already programmed, already to be Robina's tendencies. Good at music, good at football, good at this, good at that, whatever, or bad at this, whatever. Make up your personality. They're your tendencies. They're triggered before you get anywhere near your mother and father. This is very shockingly different. The third lot of karmic seeds, the third bank vault is my view, it's called the first one's called the fully ripened result, the type of rebirth. The second lot are called the tendencies, your tendencies similar to the cause, or your actions, tendencies similar to the cause. In other words, your habits. Music, football, killing, being kind, whatever they might be. Third is called your experiences similar to the cause. Now, we can see we are very social beings, aren't we? I mean, we get born into a human being's body for a start. And we have mummies and daddies and siblings and aunties and uncles and the cat, and the rats and the roaches and the pets and the next door neighbors throughout our life. Up until now, we have come across thousands, if not thousands, of sentient beings. And this third way karma ripens, called experiences similar to the cause, your past causes, are the seeds that ripen in relation to how people see and treat us. So like Hitler, you can be born with very heavy-duty negative tendencies, but also like Hitler, and that's his tendencies, his intentions, his actions similar to the cause, but look at the experiences similar to the cause. He was revered by millions of people. He had a powerful reputation. He was seen as an amazing being. Millions of people adored him, and then millions of people hated him. All of those experiences due to past actions he did in relation to those people. Karma's personal. And karma, this is the interesting point. If it's a natural law, and Buddha says it is, that's his observation, this is shocking to us. Then nothing can be random. If it's a natural law, it's got to be coherent. You know, even if you don't know a word about botany, you know the principle that if something grows there, you must have planted the seed. Well, the seed's there. There's a seed there from which it came. Meaning everything that arises in our life has to have a cause. And this is the point about the cause and effect. This is the point that I'm getting to in the second noble truth. There are hundreds of causes that produce anything. And there's hundreds of causes that will come together to produce that moment of happiness and that moment of suffering. But he narrows it down to two main causes of suffering, such that when I can locate those and fix those, guaranteed I will not have future suffering. Or flip it over and say that he narrows down the two main causes of happiness, such that if I put those into place, guaranteed I will get the result. So those two main causes of suffering, this is the shocking part, are not out there, they're in here. They're called karma, past action, that set you up to have that boyfriend, the relationship with that boyfriend, to meet him in the first place, and then set you up to have him punch you in the nose. The past action of yours similar to that, an experience similar to the cause, that then ripens as him harming you. So the view of karma answers the question, why me? You can give a great detailed analysis of my boyfriend and what his mother did to him and why he's such a wacko. That answers why he's a wacko. It doesn't answer why me. We don't have an answer for that. This is the view of karma. It's totally related to oneself. And every moment of happiness is exactly the same. But I've never yet met a person who says, Robina, why do good things happen? We only go on about the bad. We're obsessed with the bad. So the first way my karma ripened, each one of us, we got a human body, like a miracle. It's like amazing to get a human body. But it's not a miracle. It's the fruit of past virtue, past goodness, past non-killing in particular. Second, we've got a bunch of tendencies in this mind of ours. They're all our own past habits. The concept is not complicated. Nothing to do with Buddha or a creator. Nothing to do with your mother and father. In the sense that you got it has got nothing to do with it. How it then ripens in your life, like my tendency to be good at music, that had a lot to do with my mother because she was able to help me nourish that tendency. My father being angry with me, he didn't make me angry, but it nourished my tendency to be angry back. That's the way to see. So the outside world, the role it plays, whereas for us, we think it's the main cause of happiness and suffering, for the Buddha, the outside world is merely the catalyst, a secondary cause. This is very, very shocking. But when we get this and attempt to apply it, it completely changes your life. You become independent, you become more powerful, you become less a victim, you take responsibility, you become more self-respectful. It's incredible. It's not the way we think it is. And we think of it as punishment and reward, kind of brutal. So it's so wrong. The fourth way our karma ripens, this seems more abstract, we can explain it, is called environmental karma. It's the way the very physical world impacts upon us. So let's use a simple example of killing. The first result of killing, if that is triggered as a main karma at the time of death, then you're going to get an animal birth, a spirit birth, or a hell being birth. But in our case, it was non-killing, so we got a human birth. Second, you might be born, and look at the human realm. Most humans do kill something, which is the tragedy. And most religions, with respect, even, in some way or another, condone killing, even say it's good. I mean, I was taught as a Catholic that God made animals for our benefit. And it's interesting, different concept. So we can kill them and eat them, or kill them. Eating is a secondary thing. Killing them is fine. Or it depends, But that's what was taught. God made them for our benefit as a gift to us, humans. So the first result of killing, in this case, we've got a human one of non-killing. The second one is you're born with a tendency to kill. Look at the humans. Most humans have that tendency to kill. Ants, dogs, rats, people. Some people have people. Some people go hunting, some people go fishing, some people kill the cockroaches. You know, we've all got some tendency to kill something, most of us. It's rare to find a human being from the beginning of their birth just naturally doesn't want to kill. It's quite unusual. That would be an indication that that person has lived in vows of not killing. And we'll describe this. The third way killing would ripen for that person is they would get killed or die young. Now look at the world. Look at the world. Yeah. People die at the age of 1 or 2 or 7. People die with no, what they say is no medical cause. In other words, we don't know why they died. Karma. In other words, for the Buddha, their karmic petrol tank of non-killing as an experience literally ran out. And you wake up one day and you die. Petrol ran out. That's it. Could be catalyzed by a car accident, could be catalyzed by being killed, could be catalyzed by a sickness. But sometimes you just die. No medical cause, as we say. So babies die. We can see that. 1-year-olds die, 5-year-olds, healthy people, happy people, young people. Fetuses die. My feeling is if you did some research, because you begin at conception. That's when your consciousness joins the egg and sperm. That's the beginning of you. I think the Jews say that God doesn't put the soul in there until a few months later. The Christians say God puts the soul in the beginning as well. But the Buddhists say your consciousness, no one put you there, you went there. You know, you ran there like a magnet from the intermediate state after you died. When they hopped into bed, the condition ripened and you ran like a magnet to that egg and sperm. And that's the beginning of you. So we can see that fetuses die. It's very interesting. And I'm sure if you did the research, I wouldn't be surprised if you come up with that more human beings, including fetuses, die before they're born than those who get born. Think about that. I wouldn't be surprised. That's the karma of that person. So that sentient being who went to my womb when I was 23, living in London, and I'd hopped into bed with a boy called Rob, who was Australian, and he earned £1 an hour. I was very impressed by his £1 an hour. I earned £13 a week. I remember those details. But I didn't like him much. I was a hippie, so I was kind. I thought, hippies do things, so I was a good hippie. So I remember vividly. The second I was there with Rob, I thought, oh, I'm pregnant. Many people talk to this experience, by the way. I always mention this. One person I know, she was staying with her mummy and her daddy with her husband whilst they were building their house. And she came down for breakfast one morning. She said, oh, Mum, I'm pregnant. And the mother said, oh, great. When did you find out? She said, 40 minutes ago. It's a really common experience of some women, some men maybe. I knew with crystal clarity. This is a really interesting point. I knew with crystal clarity when I was in bed with this boy called Rob. I said to myself, oh, no, I'm pregnant. Now, you know what happened next second? I'm going to have an abortion. There's no doubt in my mind. Now, that's the karmic seeds ripening in my mind to kill. So that means that little being, I never know it was a girl or a boy. I cut her out when she was 12 weeks. I always say she. She created the karma. She won the jackpot and she got a human body. And she got my human body. We had karma together. There was no accident. But 2, she had the experience similar to the cause, the third track of karma, to get killed by me because she must have killed me in the past. I mean, speaking simply, an experience similar to the cause. So I aborted her. It was very clear, and everything enabled the abortion so clearly. It was 1968 in London. I remember the National Health had just approved abortions, and I thought, how lucky I am. I went to the hospital, Charing Cross, gave some reason. The doctor said, fine, went to the hospital, and they cut the fetus out. And then the poor fetus, they didn't cut it out properly. They mangled her little body, so they had to cut her out again. So that's the karma of this being. Then I created the cause to kill. The nurses and doctors whom I asked to do it did it. All this dependent on a rising situation, So I'm just describing it. So this is the experience similar to the cause of that fetus to be killed. So many people, abortion is one thing when the mother decides, and there's a miscarriage is when the baby's karma just runs out. So the experience similar to the cause of killing is you either just get killed or you just die. Now look at COVID. The karma of having COVID, that's, okay, now the fourth one first, that's environmental karma. So the environmental karma of killing is that you get sick. You got weak body, things make you sick, you get the pollution, the water, the food, the allergies. This is the environmental result of past killing or past harming others in general, that I've got allergies, that my body reacts to certain things in the outside world, blah, blah, blah. That's the environmental karma. Some people are fat and healthy until they're 97. They can be killing, they can be eating garbage, they smoke cigarettes, and they stay fat and healthy till the day they die because they don't have the environmental result of killing to be harmed by the physical world, and they don't have the experience similar to the cause of killing. They're certainly creating the cause of future ones by killing now. And we can see that. I always quote, I read Warren Buffett's biography, his memoir by his own, his daughter maybe wrote, I can't remember, maybe he wrote his own one. And his daughter in there said, I never saw water pass his lips. He's renowned for his terrible diet. He's close to 90, fit as a fiddle still. I think he had a bit of cancer, but he fixed it. And he's famous for his crummy diet. Since a child and still to the present, his one diet, morning, noon, and night, is cheeseburgers, some flavored Coca-Cola, and vanilla ice cream. And he's not dead yet. So clearly, bad food can't be the main cause of dying. It's a catalyst. The main cause of dying is past killing. The main cause of not dying is non-killing. So this is the thing to always remember. So karma is always first karma, the Buddhist one. Now that takes time. That's not the view we have, And then the environmental result of killing is that you get sick and look at all the people with COVID who got sick. But the karmic result, the experience similar to the cause result of COVID is killing, past killing, all those who died from COVID. But look at it, environmentally, it's the entire universe. So it's the entire world experiencing the collective karma environmentally of past killing thousands of lives ago. Environmental karma takes the longest to ripen, where the physical world that we actually exist in harms us. Now, equally, flip it over. Non-killing. You're going to get a decent human rebirth, for example, human. You will not have a tendency to kill. You will not get killed or die young, and you will have really good environmental karma. Nothing can harm you. The world nourishes you no matter what you eat or do. We can see people like that. So all actions have any of these four results. And you can have mixed results. Like I said, with Hitler, you can have terrible negative tendencies, but a human birth. You can have really good experiences similar to the cause, when at some point he was revered by people and had a great reputation. That's the fruit of virtue. Mr. Trump, I love the example of Mr. Trump. He's famous, isn't he, for lying. Washington Post kept a track of all his, and he gave them, they would give him anything from 1 to 5 Pinocchios for the strength of his lies. They kept track of every lie. Now, some people adore Mr. Trump and believe every word he says. That's due to Mr. Trump's karma with them personally, how many lives ago, of speaking the truth to them, so that they trust his words now. And some people have the karma of not believing a word he says, and probably sometimes he even does tell the truth. We're the creators of ourselves. That's why I love the view of karma. I love being the boss. And I'm really I say that, but I mean it, because it brings empowerment and confidence, and it stops the victim mentality. No matter how bad the world gets, no matter how terrible things that happen to us, and terrible things do happen to us, you're able to work with it. Like I gave that example Friday night of those 2 young Tibetan nuns, for whom karma is the natural thing in their minds. It's in their culture for 1,000 years. It's in the bones of their being, as in the same way that the material is used in the bones of our being as a truth. So there they were, being tortured, sexually abused, imprisoned for years, not angry, not thinking the thought, how dare they do this to us? We don't deserve it. They didn't have that view. This is the point. And that's the philosophical view of anger. So anger is based upon the view that someone else made you. Really listen to that carefully. If you know, like that's why I always give the example. If you have a garden and you see weeds in your garden, you would never say, who put weeds in my garden? And this is the logic. Why? Is because it's your garden. You might not remember. when you put them in, but it's your garden, so you own the weeds. It's such a good example. Well, your life is your garden for the Buddha, and whatever is in it, whatever you meet day after day, you sowed it, you grew it, so it's your experience. This is so delicious. It's so tasty. So it cuts victim. It cuts anger. It cuts attachment. The other example is your bank account. You would never look in your bank account and see there's lack of dollars there and say, how come there are no dollars in my bank? That's an assumption that somebody else is supposed to put dollars in your bank, but you know it's your bank account and that you are responsible. That's the view to have. And then when you have that view of your life, you grow up, you stop being a victim, you stop blaming, and I'm not being mean because terrible things do happen to us. You own whatever's in front of you. As Lama Zopa says, everything we experience in our life, that's our karmic appearance. It's a hugely powerful view the more we kind of try to put it into practice, not just some vague philosophy about some, we use karma as a sort of like a big stick. It's so silly to think that way because it refers to all the good things. And that's where we never think of the good things. This is what's so interesting. If we look at attachment and anger, which are the two of the essential states of mind we run between all the time in our lives. And this is now the second scope, junior high school. If we look at the philosophy, really, of what those emotions are saying, they're cognitive stories, Attachment is an assumption that I only deserve the good. Think about that. Think about it. Attachment only wants the nice things. It can't cope with anything that's not good, which means it can't cope with anything that I don't want. Attachment, by definition, is I want that. It's totally self-centered. And there's an assumption that I deserve only the good things. We have that view. And then when someone mean to you, I don't deserve that. It's really quite powerful assumptions. And we've made those up, Buddha says. We've got to analyze them, unpack them. So anger is, how dare that happen to me? I don't deserve it. And attachment greedily grabs the thing that's delicious because we assume we deserve it. Give me more, please. They're very powerful. It's very fascinating. So these young nuns, because they have the view of karma and they're trying to work on their minds, blah, blah, blah. In other words, the words I'm saying here are what they have in their mind and is the basis of their practice, that they were being tortured and sexually abused. And don't say it was easy, but this is their view. They have this, and this is what supported their practice. This is the way they interpreted their experiences. And that's why one of them said at the end of telling these former prisoners back in 2003, like I mentioned, this visit with His Holiness, that Richard Gere invited all these people. And this young woman said, there was tears, and she said, and of course, we had compassion for our torturers because we know we harmed them in the past and we know they will suffer in the future. And that's why the whole point I'm making is that to have this level of compassion we're talking about is absolutely, totally, what's the word? Not even determined, another word, by the view of karma. How could they have compassion for those people? The reason they had compassion is because they knew there's a karmic connection. And the reason they had compassion is because they know that whatever they experienced, they caused it. So they're able to own it. It's not easy. Who says it's easy? No one says it's easy. But that's what informed their experiences. And that's why there wasn't this rage and despair, which we have, because we're saying, why is this happening to me? I don't deserve it. Because we don't have an explanation of why things happen. We just think it's good luck and bad luck. I mean, you don't have to have the Buddha's view. I'm just talking about it. So you grow up. This is junior school, entry level, grade 1, the view of karma is profound, but it's the basis of your ability to have compassion for others, because you look and go, oh my God, we're all in the same boat. Look at those Russians and Ukrainians, those Russian boys hanging out in their home with their mummy, their daddy, their whatever, they're young enough, maybe they had a wife and kids, and then they're told to go to war. They don't see any past tendency to want to kill. They don't have any thought of Ukrainians. They probably even wonder where Ukraine is. They're sent in the army, and then karma ripens, and the Ukrainians who've got the karma to be harmed will get harmed, and they wonder why these Russian boys torture them. And then the Ukrainians, I mean, it's not being rude about anybody. We're all in the same boat, acting out this maniac past tendency we've got, these past relationships that we don't posit, that we don't remember. That's the tragedy. So compassion for both. That's the point. Meanwhile, you're trying to stop the Russians from killing the Ukrainians. Of course you do. But you have compassion for both. You see your two kids fighting. And 1 minute I'll come running to my mother, Mommy, Janet hurt me. And she's, oh, Bobsy, darling, it's all right. The next minute Janet comes running, Mommy, Robina hurt me. Oh, it's all right, darling. And she'll love both of us. You know, the big picture. But you can't get that until you get karma for yourself. Impossible. Because that level of compassion is based upon that view. That those sentient beings created the cause to have their own experiences, all their suffering and all their happiness. And we're all in the same boat, doing it to each other, having it done to us, in terms of the bad stuff and the good stuff too. But because we're addicted to negativity, because ego loves negativity, we only ever think of karma in terms of the bad. But every millisecond in one day of anything that goes well, nice weather, pleasant feeling, so much pain in your knee, person smiles at you, we just take it for granted. And you know why? Because attachment is this junkie that assumes that good things had better happen. So we don't think there's a cause. Just give me more, please. I don't care. It's like hubris. Attachment's like hubris. It's kind of this greedy entitlement. Give me the good things and then give me more. It's heavy. And then anger is this shock. How dare you do that to me? And this is not something we learn. Our mother did not teach us this. We come into this life programmed with these misconceptions. Totally programmed from practicing thinking this way, the Buddha says, for countless lifetimes. This is why we suffer. We should be weeping in compassion for ourselves, not beating ourselves up. You can't have compassion for those torturers until you have incredible compassion for yourself. And that means you have to look at your own suffering. It doesn't mean you become fanatic about it and kind of obsessed with it. It's not a question of that. It's just seeing yourself and then seeing your good stuff as well. And you can own both. Delight and rejoice in your virtue and in every good thing that happens. And you can have a positive attitude there. And then you can delight in other people's happiness as well. So implied in all this story is we're looking at the second kind of suffering, which is the suffering of change, which is when good things happen. Because it's why it's suffering at the moment is because it's based on attachment. Because attachment poisons. Attachment is over-exaggeration of the good things. Attachment is a symptom of an unhappy person, of a half a person who doesn't think they're enough. So it kind of becomes this greedy expectation of delicious things out there, this expectation that people should make me happy. And then when you get the delicious thing, the key point about why it's called the suffering of change is very specific. It's just think the chocolate cake. So attachment over-exaggerates. All the delusions by definition over-exaggerate. So attachment exaggerates deliciousness. So there you are feeling like you're left. You haven't got enough. You're bereft. You're not enough. You're not, you're lonely, bereft. Don't feel you are enough. Don't feel you have enough. That's attachment. So you're hankering after something. So for you, it might be a piece of cake. Give example. So then when you see that shape and color, after thinking what's missing, I'm going to get, then you think, oh, cake, how exciting. So already you're anticipating this delicious cake, and already you're exaggerating the deliciousness of the cake and the power of the cake to trigger happy feelings. So then you grasp at the cake, you get the cake, you put it in the mouth, and this is the interesting point. It does trigger happy feelings. When that cake meets the mouth, it does trigger happy feelings. We know that. But because this is the tragedy of attachment. You see, I've got to say this here because to give us a bit more context. When we look at, we've talked about this often. When you look at the Buddhist model of the mind, you've got 3 categories of states of mind. Very simple. All the neurotic, ridiculous, deluded ones that exaggerate and distort, that are all the voices of ego, which causes suffering and causes to harm others, which Buddha has found we can get rid of. Second, your virtues, your goodness, your qualities, your kindness, your love, your intelligence, your compassion, all your good qualities. They're your saving grace. And the third lot, like I refer to them, they're like the mechanical parts of our mind. Intention, concentration, good memory. They're not good or bad. thieves need good memory. Thieves need mindfulness. It's not a virtue. It's just the ability to remember what you're doing moment by moment. Everybody needs that to function. So in that sense, it's neither negative nor virtuous, but it's necessary. So there's I call them the mechanical parts of the mind. Now, there's one there that seems odd to call it this, but this is a really specific Buddhist understanding. If you want to understand Buddhist teachings, you've got to understand this. It's called feeling. And there's only three kinds: happy feelings or pleasant feelings. And you've got a spectrum there from the mildest pleasant feeling to the most tense bliss in the universe. I'm waiting for that one. But we know those we talk about: ecstasy, bliss, joy, happiness, blah, blah. It's a type of feeling, happy feeling. Then you've got unhappy feelings or unpleasant feelings, anything from the mildest to the most intense: torture, suffering internally. The word happiness and suffering also refer to these. So pleasant feeling is another word for happiness. This is a really crucial point. Happiness, because we're so addicted to believing the cake is the cause of happiness, or the boyfriend's the cause of happiness, then when someone says, tell me about your happiness, I'll describe the cake. That's just the catalyst. Happiness is in the mind, is a pleasant feeling. It's a really important point. Happiness, by definition for the Buddha, is a state of the mind. A cake triggers it. A happy boyfriend triggers it, but they're not happiness in themselves. But we think they are. We think not only is the cake the cause of happiness, but we almost think of it as the happiness, because we're completely addicted to the outside world, and it's just technically wrong, Buddha says. It's not moralistic. So happy feeling and unhappy feeling, happiness and suffering. And we only want happy feelings, and we only don't want suffering feelings. We know this. So they're in this third category. So you've got, in relation to the cake, now let's use a boyfriend instead. It's a better example. So you've got some negative quality there. It's called attachment, this over-exaggeration of his deliciousness. Is it the expectation in your mind, this hubris, that he had better make me happy? It's his job to make me happy. You have that expectation. You exaggerate his deliciousness. You exaggerate his importance in your life. You exaggerate his role in making you happy, which brings this massive expectation, this manipulation to make him only do what you want. It's a totally wicked state of mind. And if this predominates, you have a nightmarish relationship. Now, the next characteristic you do got some love. Love is in the second category. Love is a virtue. Love is, may he be happy, my beloved boyfriend. That's your saving grace. So if you've got some love and some compassion, then you'll have an okay relationship. They will subdue your attachment. But if you've mainly got attachment, you're going to be a narcissistic, self-centered monster. Yet, honestly, look at the world. Because you don't have much capacity to have empathy. You're totally self-centered, and you've got some arrogance as well. Add that into the little mix. This arrogance, and you'll be a totally self-centered person that sees the entire world in terms of how they can help you. That means you haven't got that much virtue to access. Then you'll have a terrible relationship. So now, let's say, the third thing, this is what's interesting. The third thing that's happening here with my boyfriend, there's attachment to my boyfriend, which is ridiculous, exaggeration, rubbish. There's got love, which is may he be happy, which is valid and virtuous. Then the third one is called happy feelings. So I'll go back to the cake, but it's the same principle as the boyfriend. So there's the cake. Attachment exaggerates its deliciousness, expects to get the happiness because we're hungry and needy and don't feel we've got enough happiness. So it's very desperate. Then you've got, and as soon as you meet the cake in the right hole, you don't put the cake in here. It's not like you forget where it belongs. Habit is very strong. You know where it belongs. And then it meets a sensory consciousness called taste consciousness. And yes, it does trigger very pleasant feelings, both sensory and mental. It does do that. Now, what happens is this is the analysis that makes it to get it to see how actually it's suffering. So attachment is this enormous expectation, this hunger, this kind of frantic, So an attachment essentially is never satisfied. So this is why the tragedy here. So what happens is this: first mouthful, and it does trigger a very delicious feeling. And probably when you look back later, it's the best feeling. It's downhill from now. But do you know what happens? Attachment, as you are tasting the cake, attachment, which has been expecting the cake, gets the bliss and then is not satisfied. So you have to stuff the cake into a second mouthful because you're thinking the next mouthful will bring it, because you're not satisfied yet. So you think, oh, the second mouthful will do it. But we know that the second mouthful will trigger slightly less pleasure. And then you're still not satisfied. So attachment keeps going. You're still not satisfied. And you have the third mouthful expecting more pleasure. But this is where the suffering starts. The pleasure gets less. And the fourth mouthful, the pleasure gets less. And then the second piece, the pleasure gets less. Until what happens? You're going to vomit. So what happened to the pleasure? Because attachment was never satisfied. You missed it. So this is called the suffering of change. So the very cake that caused you to have some pleasant feelings is the same cake that makes you vomit. But tomorrow you forget the vomit and you just anticipate the pleasure again because you forget all the rest of it. It's not being mean. It's rather depressing to hear it because we don't know. This is the point. We don't know how else to get pleasant feelings. Think about it. We're totally reliant at this simple level on the sensory objects. This is Buddha's analysis of samsara, how it functions technically. So then what's the answer? Because it's like it seems kind of cruel of Buddha. You mean I've got to give up attachment? Then where the hell am I getting my pleasure from, please? Because Buddha's not saying you shouldn't have pleasure, but because we conflate attachment and pleasure, we throw the baby out with the bathwater, become nihilistic, and think Buddha's being mean, and you've got to give up pleasure. That's why when you're fundamentalist religious, you're like a nightmare. Pleasure is not attachment. Buddha's saying, as Lama Yeshe would say, the more pleasure, the better, dear. So actually, this is what's so shocking and surprising. Buddha's path is a method to get such joy and happiness and pleasure in your mind that doesn't change into suffering experiences. And that's what but he doesn't say it so simply. So he is saying, hey, you guys, you think pleasure, happy feelings come from the cake, or you think pleasant feelings are what you get when you get the object of attachment. You're wrong. Happy feelings that are far more superior, far clearer, far more joyful, and don't dissipate, please hear this, actually come from giving up attachment. That's Buddhism, the wisdom way. Not even the finished of it yet, but this is the major one. And we know this is true. We know even you're really thirsty and you greedily drink that mouthful of water. You don't have any pleasure at all. You're just overwhelmed, just like a vampire. But if you eat even just a piece of toast more casually, more relaxed, and you enjoy it more. You enjoy it more because you're less greedy. Attachment is just greed. That's all. And stop being mean about us. We are hungry. We are emotionally hungry. And we're convinced the cake will do it, the boyfriend will do it, the handbag will do it, the praise will do it, and who knows what will do it. And we don't know how to become satisfied. That's the tragedy. So it sounds punitive. It sounds like criticism, but it's just this analysis. This is Buddha's analysis of suffering. This is the second kind of suffering. In other words, happiness does come. Now, it's not meant to be depressing. Like if you've got a relationship in the beginning, we all know it's divine. The sex is divine. I'm talking about it close like that, when there's a lot of joy. We all know eventually that calms down. And we all know that if it's mainly attachment, you won't have a relationship. You'll just hate it. You'll wake up one day and think, who's this disgusting person in my bed? Because attachment is not sustainable. But if you have love and kindness and patience and humility, then your relationship is sustainable. And the attachment part has come secondary. We all know that. We all know that. So you have to distinguish between attachment and love, distinguish between attachment and pleasure. Joy, pleasure, happiness, they sound like sins to us because we misunderstand these teachings, But literally, joy, Buddha's telling us, and this is why Lama Yeshe really went out of his way to get us to understand this, like in his teachings on Mahamudra. Just getting single-pointed concentration, just getting this level of concentration that these genius Indians invented centuries ago, this technique, just accessing the subtle levels of your mind temporarily and therefore subduing attachment at all the crazy conceptual level. Just getting that level of mind, you are tasting the actual nature of your mind, which is joy. This is not joking. Lama Yeshe in the Mahamudra, he says the levels of joy, bliss, ecstasy, rapture, he uses those words that you experience in this subtler state of mind that you accomplish from a getting concentration. You can't describe it. And this is really, in a sense, what Buddha's saying. That's our natural state. But it's not berserk. It's not eager, greedy and grasping and frantic and desperate. It's everybody who has any even mild experiences in a valid meditation will all say that joy is peaceful. You can't describe. It's quiet and peaceful. It's not greedy, which is what the pleasure is when we get it from attachment. So we've got to be very clear in the meaning of these words. This is coming from the Buddhist psychological model. It's right, quite precise. So, I watch it left it. What time is it? What time is it? Oh, here we go. Oh, gosh, late. Sorry. So any questions? We'll have a little tea break. Are there any questions, though, first? You don't have to be. You can just relax, have a cup of tea first, maybe. Yeah? Have a cup of tea and a cake. Yeah, go on. Go, darling. Go, sweetheart. Go, Bene. Bade. Give us the mic, please. Give her the mic, please. Good, sweetheart. Talk. Is it on? Are you sure it's on? Okay. Are you hearing her Zoom?
The pleasure and attachment.
Can you Zoomers hear her? Yes. Okay, go. That's good.
The idea that pleasure and attachment are different things, I think,
utterly and completely different, but like only come together is the trouble. Yeah.
It makes it very easy, I think, for lay Western people to practice, which I like.
Why is that? Why lay Western as opposed to me?
I'm sorry, I didn't mean Western. I meant I meant non-Buddhist, non-practicing Buddhists, I guess.
Oh, okay, go. So, I see. Go on.
But I'm wondering at some point, like, sometimes it's hard when you're living in this society, in materialist society.
That's right, exactly.
You have to maybe completely get rid of.
I understand your point. Yeah. Well, it's a bit like talking about, if you decide to stop being an alcoholic. Attachment is being a junkie, basically. There's just levels of attachment, that's all. And then the object in this case would be alcohol. And we all know that nobody would ask you to give up attachment to alcohol while continuing to drink alcohol. So we can know our minds enough to know the objects that trigger so much delusion in us, like attachment or anger. We need to be sensible and intelligent and remove ourselves from the object. But when we know reasonably the things we can handle, we've got to be intelligent about it. Mm-hmm. But by definition, it's hard to give up attachment while enjoying the objects. Of course it is. This is the way it is.
But we're surrounded by all kinds of things that can trigger attachment.
By definition, we see as attachment.
So I really want to know, I think it's something I wanted to ask in general. At what point, do you think someone should follow a monastic path?
I understand your point. Yeah, exactly. I understand. Why don't we do that till after tea break? Okay? Let's have a cup of tea break or some kind of break. Mary, keep the question for later, sweetheart. We'll be 15 minutes. We'll back in about 20. Come back at about 22. Okay, so the question was, how do you work out, basically your question is, at how much, what's the value of removing yourself from the dramas? In a sense, is what you're saying. We have to know our capacity. So, the more we understand attachment, and we understand that this actually is, this Buddha refers to this realm of existence that we live in as the desire realm, meaning attachment, meaning karmically over eons of time, it is literally the product, like karmic evolution of attachment. What do you think a body is? Look at it. Penises, vaginas, breasts, mouths, ears. They don't come from God. They don't come from nowhere. They're the karmic evolution or devolution, if you like, of attachment. We created these bodies. We created, therefore, the objects. We have to feed those holes with. So we are living. It's like we're living. This is the all-pervasive suffering. So the first level of suffering is, okay, here we go. Gallery view. Okay, is basically attachment is the problem. For the whole thing, attachment is the problem. So the first level of suffering is when attachment doesn't get what it wants. And it's really pretty intense suffering. The second level of suffering is when attachment does get it what it wants, but it doesn't last and it turns into misery. The bliss doesn't last, it turns into misery. The third level of suffering is where you are completely just, so the first level is, okay, the third level is you're born. So basically the problem is being a junkie and the attachment's being a junkie. So the third level of suffering is being born with a junkie mind and a body that's the product of being a junkie in a world that's the product of being a junkie, where you have no choice and the world is made up of heroin. And in order to survive, you have to ingest heroin. Do you get my point? That's the third level of suffering. So by definition, this world we live in, which we have karmically created, it is not a gift from God. We have karmically created it due to our attachment. It's by definition objects of attachment. So necessarily it's attachment. Necessarily attachment has to crave those things, and we believe when we get them, we'll get happy. And then we get the bad things, we get suffering. So we spend our lives trying to avoid the ugly and get the nice. And then the attachment and the suffering and the happiness we do get doesn't last anyway, and it turns into the first kind of suffering. So like this kind of nightmare, if we see it from this perspective. So the first level of practice is at least stop creating the worst kind of suffering. Stop killing, stop stealing, stop lying. Play safe, be nice, be disciplined, be ethical. And you'll steady your own mind, and then life won't be so tortured. Do you understand? In the future as well. The second kind of suffering, you go more marvelous, more deep inside. You get to the mind itself, and you even begin to give up attachment, and you become even more joyful, more content, more fulfilled, still within samsara. You can have the best of both worlds. The third level is really best to give up attachment at all, altogether. And that means you have to realize emptiness, and you cut the root and you stop being reborn altogether in this crazy world. So you have to know where you're at and what the karma is you have in order to decide whether I want to go after the sex drug, give up sex, drugs and rock and roll, become a nun and live in an environment that is conducive to me practicing all day, every day. So this is why the major difference, so the one, when you become ordained, you still live if you're on the bodhisattva path, like I don't live in a monastery, I live in the world. And I eat the same food with you, and I walk the same streets. And so still the major difference having ordination as a monk or a nun is you've got a vow of giving up attachment, called the attachment, engagement in attachment object of sexual pleasure, meaning you giving up that one, because that's not moralistic. It's just because it's clear it's one of the most intense objects, and it can be bringing the most intense suffering as well as the most intense pleasure. So it can be very distracting, though, because and it's the same really as if you want to become like a tennis player like Federer, you've got to give up most things. And it's just the same, really. No one criticizes Federer. They admire his courage. The first few years of his life, he didn't have a wife or children or pleasure. He had to go to bed early and practice 8 hours a day. That's pretty intense. So you are giving up a lot to get your goal. It's the same here. So it's up to each one of us to know the karma we have and what is the right practice for us, the right path for us. So in my own case, it was never a doubt. Even when I was a little girl, I loved God, I loved Our Lady, I loved the saints. I was a naughty girl. I wasn't like holy, but I even when I remember as girls at school, what are you going to do when you grow up? Everyone's going to get married and have babies and things. And I always think to myself, what would you want to live in a bed with somebody for? I was like, I didn't say anything, could sound weird. I thought the idea of it, even when I was trying to get happiness from having, sex, drugs and rock and roll, well, jazz actually. I tried boys, I tried girls, I tried to get happy, but it was too tortured for me. Of course, the world criticizes that and says you're just running away. I thought it was intelligent to run away. The drama starts, and the jealousy starts, and the anger starts, and the fighting starts. Jesus God, who wants that? I'd be gone like the wind in 1 second. I wouldn't stay. It was just to me like I needed to have breath, So it's just my karma, the mind I've got. My poor sisters all feel sorry for poor Robina. You understand? Now they kind of quite content for me. But it's just the karma I had. I never wanted that kind of life. It was just how it was for me. I never gave it up. I never gave up babies. I never wanted them. Do you understand? I never gave up wanting to live with somebody. I never wanted it. So we've got different styles, different approaches, what works for us. Do you understand? So you've got to know your own mind, know what's best. Does that make sense, darling? So keep aspiring. Like the Dalai Lama says, and I like to say this repeatedly, always aspire to do what's most beneficial for you and everyone else, and long-term better than short-term. So have that as like a broken record and a prayer in your heart. I'm not sure where the turn-off is. You're on a road, it's your life, it's your road, honey. I'm not sure where the turn-off is, but may I recognize it when I come. So by having this aspiration every day, may I make the right choices, may I do what's most beneficial. That, I think, nourishes the karmic seeds you've already planted in the past that will ripen as what is most beneficial. It's really how karma works. So just do that and keep moving, practice every day and see where life takes you. Do you understand? And don't take the wrong turn off because it looks cute. Oh, that looks like a nice turn. Then you get lost. Don't follow attachment. Have this courageous attitude and know that that aspiration will cause you to always make the right choice. You understand? Good, sweetheart. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, there's an anonymous question in chat.
The sound is very quiet today.
Huh.
Is it our machine here that makes it too quiet? Perhaps we're going to put you louder, Mary, here. Just a second, darling. Speak now.
Is attachment without clinging
Better, now better. Thanks, Chandra. Go on.
Okay, I'll repeat the question. It's anonymous in chat. Is attachment without clinging viable?
Well, the definition of attachment and clinging is the same. So then it's not a valid. So that question is confusing. But what I think it means, what perhaps the person means is it possible to have a relationship with a person or a cake that where there is attachment? Is it possible to make it a reasonable relationship? Yes, it is. And it's your virtues that make it reasonable. So if you've got a relationship with a person, until you're a highly realized person, you're going to have attachment. You've got to accept that. You can't give it up until you realize emptiness, basically. It's really primordially deep in all of us. So we have to accept that. So if, like I said before, if you want to have a relationship, that's the style of life you want to live with a person, maybe have babies or a house or whatever you do to live together. And of course, there will be attachment there. But if you've got enough love and patience and kindness and you see it as your practice, yes, it's manageable. You've got to know what you can handle. That's the answer. But clinging generally is the same definition as attachment. It's an over-exaggeration of the deliciousness of the external object, and it comes from this emotional hunger of not being enough. We've got to understand that. Yeah? Okay. Yes, Kate?
Is with grief and working on attachment and grasping and processing it and going into finding compassion.
A little bit clearer, Kate. Your voice is kind of soft. Just say. So I heard with grief. So just stay again,
Yeah.
darling, slowly.
Yes, grief. I know that grief may be related. I mean, it's a process we all go through in life.
It's really not so clear, Kate. If you can just speak more clearly and loudly, then we can hear. Say it again.
Okay, it may be my actual phone that's causing the issue. Grief, and looking at that as attachment, and the process you go through with finding compassion, both self and for others. How do you process grief, and how is that looked at?
I understand. So maybe the better question might simply be, let's look at what we think grief is. Shall we do that?
Yes.
Good,
please.
darling. Okay, good. I know when you study the Buddhist psychological model, you study low grief, you don't come up with a term called grief. So my feeling is it's a mixture of several states of mind. So we know when we say grief, we mean a terrible loss, is that you're feeling a loss of a person, they died, they left you, or whatever, or a big change in your life. Would you agree that in general that's grief?
Yes, I do.
Good, darling. Okay, so let's look at it. So, okay, if I would say it's made up of several things, and for sure for most of us, there's going to be a lot of attachment there. And attachment, when it stops getting what it wants, and this is not criticism, it's just logic. It's extremely painful when you don't get what attachment wants. So when especially if it's a person you're close to, like your beloved or your child, I mean, that is where it's really unbearable. This person whom you have a very strong karmic connection with, who feels really comfortable in your life, especially if they're part of your daily life, and suddenly they're not there. It's quite shocking to us. So that suffering, the level of the suffering, put it that way, that comes from grief is a mixture of a lot of attachment, which it brings and also adding to that, because we're so attached to that person or that thing, then we add another big mistake. We assume it will always be there. I think this is a major reason we suffer. We assume, because we can't bear the thought of not having our beloved in our life, we add this other mistake and we assume he's permanent. He will always be there. It will always be there. And that is a major reason we suffer. So there's attachment, which then brings this grasping at things as permanent, which means we can't bear the thought of not having. So we think they'll be there forever. This is the key way we suffer so badly. Now, if you, like His Holiness Dalai Lama, when he talks about his mum, especially when she died, he'd be in tears. He'd be sad, but it wouldn't last long, because you could say he didn't have attachment and he didn't see it as permanent, but because he had a closeness to his mother, he loved his mother, he remembered her good qualities, and it was just plain sad to know she wasn't there. And you'd say that could come mostly from the virtuous side of ourselves. But the terrible suffering comes from attachment and grasping, having an assumption that it shouldn't ever change. That's why we suffer so badly. So first of all, is that helpful? Then we can continue some more things.
Okay. Yes, it is. I just, knowing that the love and the care that we have for those that are close to us, I'm sorry I'm so low in tone. It just, working with compassion with it, what would you advise from a Buddhist perspective?
So in a situation where you've lost somebody, may I suggest that's what's happening for you? You've lost somebody.
I've lost several people to death.
I understand. So then why you've mentioned twice compassion. Can you explain to me where you see that fits in, and what do you mean by that?
I think it's brought up a lot of emotions, like fear, anxiety to me, which it's kind of foreign. I don't live that way. So knowing that the love, love is an energy, it never stops, but looking at ways to approach it in a way that is more equanimity and compassion, both to myself and to my other family members.
Oh, okay. Now I see what you're saying. Okay. So first of all, understanding why the pain is there is because of attachment and grasping at permanence. This is really true in anything. Even just break a cup, there's an awful feeling of loss because we're attached to it, which means we want it there every day, and which means because we can't bear it not to be there, we impose this extra characteristic which it doesn't possess, which it will always be there. This is the major reason we mostly suffer when we lose. So when you know that, then you can work on your own mind and know that this is a natural, and this is one of the points, death is natural. So even coming to terms with that as a reality, not in any kind of nihilistic way, it's a reasonable thing, then you'll heal your own mind and accept this reality, and you don't force yourself through this process. And then, of course, because you're involved in other people who are also connected to this person, you can try to have a feeling of being a good example to them of how to move forward and how to heal and have compassion for them, for their loss as well, of course. But if you're overwhelmed by your own grief and can't see past your own nose, then you can't help anybody. So it's important to take care of yourself and weep and cry and heal yourself, but then also knowing everybody's got the same experience, so be a good example for them and help them be strong. What do you think, Kate?
Thank you.
Good, darling. One step at a time, though. But really know the level of pain we have is the level of attachment and the assumption they'll always be there, because we can't bear the thought that they won't be there. That's where the fears and the anxiety come from. I remember one time, one woman on one of the classes, she said one of her main fears every day, she never stopped thinking about it, how her husband could die. So she said, what should I do? How can I be in the moment? I said, don't worry about being in the moment. Just tell yourself that death is natural and he will die. Don't say, oh, of course he won't die. That's lying. He will die. And then when you realize this is part of life, the interesting point is when you realize he's impermanent, you will make the most of him. You're not just clinging onto him hoping he won't die, because he will. But because you know he will die, because you know this relationship is impermanent, you will actually make the most of it every day. You will treasure it, and you will recognize it could end at any moment. And therefore, you'll be more connected, more wise, more skillful. You won't fight so much. And then every day you wake up and he's still warm and toasty next to you, you'll see it as a bonus, and you'll make the most of every day. That's what comes from realizing impermanence. You don't waste your life then and just grasp at things. You understand? Okay.
I do, ever more deeply.
And darling girl, the next teaching from this is the really powerful one. If you can, is say to yourself, you know what, Kate, this will happen to me.
Yes.
And then you will really use your life well.
Thank you so much.
Okay, sweetheart. Take care of yourself, darling. Yes.
Can you hear me on Zoom? Yes? Okay.
Good, go on.
This is actually a metaphysical question. I wanted to know what the Buddhist point of view is. So world as we know it, would the Buddha consider that as a manifestation of mind? Because that's been debated for
I understand. So that's the question. Good, absolutely. In the long term, that is literally what Buddha is saying. So in the same way that you would say that the world is a manifestation of God, he created it. If you take the view that we created it, not like a magic wand creation, that quite literally, the karma's like personal evolution over eons and eons of time due to, if you practice, even just the simplest level, if you practice virtue every day and love and kindness and compassion and don't practice non-virtue, then you'll forget about realizing emptiness. You'll be born and always have good appearances, always have kind friends, always have beautiful weather, always have lovely environments. We create the suffering that has come in front of us from our own past, and we do. So they are literally the manifestation of our mind, not in any cosmic way at all. In just the same way that if you want a beautiful house, you can build it. It is a manifestation of your mind. Karma's like that. You understand? Yes, literally. So this is where the one of evolution, I find it very interesting, how it kind of fits with that. But, let's say you've got a lizard. When we think about the lizard and we think of evolution, that one lizard comes along and then it adjusts to its environment and then it changes things slightly, and then the next lizard is slightly different. It does work. It works like that, doesn't it? Even in our ordinary lives, we do that. You live in a certain environment where it's very cold, so you wear extra clothes. So maybe it's natural. It happens. So the difference is this, though, as with a karmic view. Let's say you're born one life in a human body. Due to first karma, you get a human body. And so you would, in that life, you work on your own mind. You practice, let's say you practice killing, and you practice lying, and you practice stealing. Then guess what? Next life, you'll run to a lizard mummy. So you created the cause to have that kind of body and that kind of mind. And while you're in that lizard body, you'll adjust to lizard behavior. And then when you die, you leave the next lizards behind, and they will still have their environment. But karma is you create your environment. But you've got to be aware of it and conscious. It's not some kind of natural thing. You've got to make it happen. And you only want the best bodies and the best world and the best environment. Do you understand? That's practicing. That's the first level of practice. And the second one, practicing virtue, not harming, not killing, not stealing, living in vows, and then working on your mind and giving up attachment and giving up anger and giving up jealousy, and then being generous and loving and kind and compassionate. Then you'll always get the fruits of that. You're in charge. So it is, the universe long term. And this is where now we take the views, what's interesting, of the other realms of existence, which of course people can't stand the thought of, because you just think of hell as some monstrous place made by some monster creator who sends wicked people there. But as Lama Yeshe said, hell is not some place where the devil is waiting saying, ha ha, I'm waiting for Lama Yeshe. Hell is the manifestation of the suffering mind of that sentient being. So, it's like, so then when you take, and this is how I find this helpful to understand how there can be other realms of existence, is if you take this view, which is especially taught in the Vajrayana, that the physical world is made of the 4 elements, right? That's it. And then minds are conjoined with any particular set of those 4 elements, depending on the karma they created. You'll get the elements that suit you, lizard, or human. So if you create lizard type activity, or let's say a lion, you can see a lion, she's a really good killer. And she's got a powerful body that suits that. Well, that killing mind could have been created as a human. And then because karma multiplies in life after life, good or bad, then constant habit to kill, to be harmful to others, to have aggression. It's not surprising you run to a lion. It's a body that suits your mind, honey child, and now you live in a lion's body with the claws that are suitable. And because when you're born in that way, you've suffocated all your virtues, which were there in your human life, but now because you've got the lion body and the mind to go with it, the aggression and the killing, these are the tendencies that play out. You've got all the virtues that are still there, but they're buried under the weeds of the negativity. So the body we create the cause. So in other words, karma sends you to the lizard mind, the lizard body, the lion body, the human body, or a hell body. So if you talk the 4 elements, our mind is conjoined with these 4 elements. A hell being is described in terms of fire. Well, let's say your 4 elements, the predominant energy would be the fire element. And your mind is literally probably conjoined with that level. And you created the cause to have that type of 4 elements. So we create all of it. So some places where you get an aeroplane to get there, or somebody made to send you there, which is frankly a monstrous concept. It's the creation of sentient beings in mind. I find it very delicious for you. Understand? And we can't seize, because we're so gross in our human mind, we live at a very gross conceptual level. We can't see very far. We can't see very far with our senses. We can't remember most things. I mean, we talk about having, not remembering a past life. Don't be ridiculous. It's 12 midday, and anybody had to sit down now and account for every second of this day would be a miserable failure, because our conceptuality doesn't have the avidity. But we've got these subtle levels of mind that you can access when you get concentration. And then you can, and that level of mind, it's like the microscope of your mind that can cognize phenomena that all are existing, but which you can't see until you get the microscope. That's past lives, future lives, other people's minds. They're all accessible to our mind. We have to access that level of mind. And then when you've got bodhicitta, you use that to help. Not just be clever first. And the fact of the matter is, if these things that Buddha would assert from his own experience and his own observation don't exist, you're going to find out by following his methodology. He discovered he's a load of rubbish. He made a mistake. Thanks, mate. Goodbye. Understand? I mean, we're big girls and boys. We can handle weird ideas like hell. We get so emotional, hysterical. We can't bear the thought of it, I mean, Dalai Lama never talks about hell. He never talks about karma. He's talking to the world, So he talks accordingly to our style. It's to the biggest crowd, right? But he studied this. Every word I'm telling you is from the stuff he studied. I just don't mind talking about it, that's all. Are we communicating? People? And then you can have more compassion. Seems to me, Any people? Questions, darlings? About attachment, suffering, or change? No? Okay. All right. So now let's start. Let's start. Let's go back to the verses now, darling. Let's go back to the 8 verses, Mary. Okay. Verse, I think 7 it was. Let's have a look. 6, maybe 6. Okay, good. Stop there. Yeah, right. 6 is that one we did. Let's just read them all through, do a little meditation. I'll read them slowly and we take what we can from them. Start at the beginning. Just contemplate the thoughts. Verses 1, 2, and 3, please. There we go. Okay. So now, determined to obtain the greatest possible benefits from the presence in my life of all these suffering sentient beings, whom I'm going to add words, who we can use as grist for the mill for us to develop such compassion. These beings who are more precious to me because I want to develop compassion than even $1 million. I'm going to hold them most dear at all times. When in the company of others, I'll always try to consider myself, we'll say lowest. I can always try to see, myself as less than the others, in the sense that I will only want to see from the depths of my heart their good qualities. So here, thinking I'm going to see something better about those people, better than me, and I delight in that. I will delight that she's got prettier ears or nicer feet or better at mathematics. And kind of, it's like humility, in other words. It's a good quality. And think the only person who can have humility is a person who's got self-confidence. vigilant the moment a delusion, a neurotic state of mind, attachment, anger, fear, jealousy, anxiety appears in my mind, endangering me and others. Okay, I'll confront it and avert it. And that might include discussing with it, arguing with it, because it's kind of stubborn, you know. And avert it means at least don't let it come out your mouth without delay. You know, whenever I read about and hear about in the newspapers daily and the iPad and everything else, all about the psychopaths, these crazy human beings overwhelmed by suffering and negativity. I'll hold all these rare beings as dear, as if I found a precious treasure. Because why? Because they're going to catalyze my love and compassion and my wish to never give up practicing love and compassion, because the world is so suffering. And when we suffer, we harm others. You know, when out of envy or jealousy or resentment, others at work, let's say, or in my community, treat me badly. You know, they abuse me, insult me, or you know, talk about me. I will accept the defeat and happily offer the victory to them. When someone knew one of my beloveds, you know, person I've benefited, whom I have such great hopes, gives me terrible harm, I'll see that person as my guru, my precious teacher. So now let's discuss the last two verses. This next one says, in short, both directly and indirectly, I offer every happiness and benefit to all my mothers, to all the sentient beings. And I will secretly take upon myself all their harmful actions and suffering. So this seems to me to be the source of this practice that somehow people in the West just love it. And it's called in Tibetan Tong Len. And it really is all these 11 points that we began, we just did the first 5. It's really, this is the technique. This is like the 9th point. This is where you really do the work of meditating on, consciously thinking, visualizing, imagining. Tong Len, give me all your happiness to others, and Len, taking upon yourself their suffering. So let's describe this practice, which is really just the summary of this attitude. You know? So the first thing to say about it, which is really, I think, important, is this is not a healing method. It's not a healing method, you know, because what it is, when you do it as a meditation, it's very simple. Technically, you visualize, you imagine in front of you a person, and it could be, you know, I mean, you can go, people do years of retreat on this, and they take all the enemies, all the friends, all the animals, all the creatures of all the beings, all the different realms of existence, taking upon themselves their suffering and giving them their happiness. But you can start, even the Pabonka Rinpoche says, you can start by doing this practice in the morning, visualizing yourself in the afternoon with a headache. So you take upon yourself your afternoon headache, and you give yourself in the afternoon all the happiness. You start with yourself. Then you can start with a beloved friend. So you visualize your beloved friend, let's say, who's sick, just got a headache, something simple. So the essential practice is this. When you Tonglen, giving, taking, you do the taking first. So what you do is you imagine this headache. And then you imagine when you breathe in. Now, first of all, you can visualize, there's many ways to do it. You visualize like a little rock at your heart, which is your self-centeredness, you know. the self-cherishing. And I've never used that word until today, but I'm going to go into that, what it means, because it's very specific in Tibetan Buddhism. In Buddhism, forgive me. It's a very particular meaning in relation to attachment. I'll talk about that. So you visualize this little rock at your heart, little stubborn little kind of me, you know. And then when you breathe in first, you imagine breathing in the headache like yucky smoke. And as you're breathing it in, you imagine it comes in and then it kind of chips away at your me. And you're putting me first. But the real thing you're trying to visualize is you're imagining that as you breathe it in on you, you take from them, you take it away from them, their suffering. And you're really thinking not, oh, I'm getting a headache, I'm taking on suffering. No. You're so much, this is what this technique is, like I said, it's not to heal their headache. It's a powerful method for you to develop the courage that if you could, you would rather have the headache than them. That's what you're thinking. So it's like this brave attitude. It's incredible. So in other words, compassion is, oh my God, look at my friend with the headache. That's terrible. That's genuine compassion. That's good. But you can go further to this next level, which is the unique characteristic actually of the compassion of the bodhisattva path. And it's called great compassion. It's a technical term, maha karuna. And it's you have to cultivate it. And it's not only, oh my God, look at that headache, but it's what can I do to help? This is very courageous, and it means it's action. It's easy to say, oh, look at the terrible suffering and then change the subject. But to actually say, what can I do to help? That's pretty tremendous. But this is the unique characteristic of the compassion that we're trying to cultivate on the Mahayana path that leads to bodhicitta. So you could say that Tong Len is like, you go to the next level. Well, you know what? Give it to me. I'd rather have it than you. And of course, you can't take their headache away like that. So it's your practice. You've got to understand this is not a method to heal their headache. It's a method for you to develop the courage that if you could, you would rather have it than them. So it grows your courageous compassion. This is the point of it. It's your personal practice. You just happen to be using that sentient being who is more precious to you than $1 million. So it's not a healing technique. You've got to understand this. It's for you to develop more compassion. So you don't have to sit on your bottom to do it. You can walk down the street and see a homeless person. And instead of just, oh, the poor person, and maybe give them $1 or 10 or whatever, that's okay, that's wonderful. That's what can I do to help? That's great. But how not, you could even just imagine if I could, we're not ready for it now, to go over there, give them my clothes, give them my car keys, give them my house and my address and swap positions. That's real Tong Len. We can't do that yet. We can imagine. If I could, I would one day. That's tremendous. It's like putting atomic bombs under self-centeredness. It's not just playing a fantasy game. It's having the courageous view that if you could, you would. And you program your mind in that level of compassion. It's incredible. Now, when you breathe out blissful, radiant light, all your good qualities, your good health, your qualities, your merits, your virtue, and seeing them be happy. So the first one is a practice of compassion. Compassion is may they not suffer. It's to take away their suffering. This other practice is giving them happiness. May they be happy. And you give them happiness. You imagine giving them all your happiness. Now, the thing is, to do this attitude, have this attitude properly, is a courageous view. And if you've got self-pity, this is not your practice, babe. Do you understand? Because that's the kind of thing that often people who are mummy's little helper will run around sacrificing their lives for others. But it's totally self-centered. It's totally neurotic. It's totally drama queen. It's revolting, in fact. You understand? It's not that attitude. It's outrageous. And you're the beneficiary. That's why I love to tell before lunchtime. I love to tell this story. Our friend Harry, some of you might know Harry. He's kind of famous. He is, and now he's not. And he's as he's gotten old, he's a fat, jolly fellow. He's really fat. The big beard. He looks like Father Christmas. He looks like Santa Claus, you know. And he's famous for being jolly and happy and everybody's friend. And every time you see Harry, he's always sweeping the floor. He's not kind of go on about it. He's always there. You know, Harry just helps. And everybody who knows Harry feels that you're his best friend because he makes you feel that way. Do you understand? That's Harry. We know people like that. So the fact is he's a meditator. He's been in the caves for years and doing really powerful, heavy-duty meditations. It's also extremely humble. So Harry one time, when he was in Courtin monastery in Kathmandu Valley, he told me this story. I'd heard about it already because the story had gone out. So I asked him to explain what happened. So he's at Courtin. It must be before mobiles, because he was getting ready to go up to his cave. He has a cave up beyond Lama Zopa's cave, up in the mountains, where he lived like a yogi, right, in those mountains. So he's preparing himself to go there. So he packed his bag, 25 kilo pack, whatever. And he'd left to go up there. And usually those days they used to walk all the way. This is years ago. Maybe it has to be 80s because Lama Yeshe was involved. No, he wasn't. Lama Zopa was involved. So maybe later after the 80s, maybe 90s, I don't know. So basically Lama Zopa then said, I had a dream that Harry would die. And he asked Geshe Lama Kongtrul, this amazing yogi who's been around for years at Courtin, he passed away in 2000. He asked him to pray for Harry. That was all that happened. He said to get a message to Harry, but it was too late. So clearly he didn't have phones, So anyway, this is the story. He was walking up the mountains, and the particular route, and I've been up that route up to Naldo, so it's very treacherous, and the particular route had been an avalanche, so it was blocked. So they had to take a particularly extra treacherous route to get up there. So I think there was a nun with him. She must have told the story first. So he's walking up there with a big pack, and then suddenly in this very treacherous bit, he saw 4 or 3 or whatever Sherpa porters. So these porters, and I know from our trip up there, they're amazing. They wear their flip-flops and they take like 50, 60, 20, 40 kilo packs. They're incredible. And they're on their head and they're walking, and all you can do is see your feet. So even a small pack, I know walking up there and you got knocked over by a yak, So it's easy to fall off the top, and the clips of the yaks regularly fall off. So it was really treacherous, and they're concentrating totally on their pack in this narrow piece. And he sees these 4 Sherpas very close. And he said, my first thought was 4 of them, 1 of me. So this is the framework for this, the context for this is in all the practices of cultivating bodhicitta, which is what our discussion is here. And I haven't gone into this much. There's this huge area of practice of these techniques, these like logical arguments you use to help smash self-cherishing, self-centeredness. And one of them is logical, although it just sounds like stupid logic. I'm only one person. There's 4 people there. Logically, 4 are more important than me. Now, ego doesn't want to know that. You understand? If a normal person would see the 4 Sherpas and you'd scream at them to stop, or you'd go back against the edge of the cliff, hoping they don't fall off. Do you understand? But what he did was, he said the second thought he had was, so he said 4 of them, 1 of me, and I'll step to the side. So he stepped to the edge of the cliff with his back to the 4, and suddenly he realized it was so intense and so tight. Then he said to himself, if they knock me, I won't hold on. Now, before we go further, this is the point about meditation. Meditation, we so often think in the West, is like you're trying to get an experience. No, it's training. If you go up 8 hours a day on the tennis courts, you're training. You're getting better and better and better so you can do Wimbledon. Lance Armstrong was training, and then so he could win the whatever it was, So here in meditation for years and years and years, there's Harry training with all these practices. And then practice makes perfect. So there he is, now the proof of the pudding. He sees 4 Sherpas, they're more than me. He's practicing his meditation. Now he's putting his money where his mouth is, and he stands to the edge of the cliff. Then the next second, they keep walking and they do knock him. And he doesn't fall. He doesn't hold on. So he said he was falling. His feet stay on the ground and he's falling, and he feels his pack pulling him, and he said, I had a psychic vision of the entire fall. I saw myself crashing to the ground. But then he said, I felt the hands of Geshe Lama Kongtrul forcefully pushing me, and he reversed direction and he fell onto the path. I liked that story. So the nun who was there, she started to tell the story. He wouldn't have told it. She's observed it, He's falling and then he reverses direction. I mean, you can't lie about that. He didn't have any wires sneakingly pulling them up, showing Sarah what a good monkey was. No, not like that. So, and he explained it because I think it's good to hear it. And he was very humble about it. He explained. And I find that so that's the culmination. So like, Federer winning Wimbledon is the end result of years of practice. Harry doing that is the end result of years of practice, because you can't do that if you don't practice. You can't suddenly overnight become, if they're your children, maybe. but they were for strangers, So these retreats they're doing, these are trainings where you're programming your mind to smash the old habits and develop the new ones. That's really what it is. And that also indicates to me the power of the Buddhas. The power. Geshe-la Kongtrul is said to be a highly realized being who spent years and years up in the mountains. I was doing his biography for a while. It's not finished yet, but it's there. He has extraordinary stories about it. Living naked for years up in the mountains, 6 foot of snow in the winter, serious Vajrayana practitioner, serious practitioner of Vajrayogini. I mean, doing the work 100%. Naked because he was able to sustain the heat in his own body from all his practices, didn't need sleep, didn't need food, didn't eat, didn't sleep, practiced 24 hours a day. Well, that's pretentious. Okay, that's interesting. That's fanatic. That's fanatic, definitely. That's definitely fanatic. These bodhisattvas are fanatic, okay? He was an amazing being, wonderful stories about him. So there he is. So, Harry said, I felt the hands of Geshe-Lama Kongtrul push me in the opposite direction. So, it fits with the Buddha's teachings that by the time you get to a certain level of bodhicitta, there's 10 stages of cultivating bodhicitta, 10 stages of being a bodhisattva, all the way to Buddhahood, like step by step, like stages of training. And even the lowest level bodhisattva, and this is all again technically explained, is able to manifest their own mind in at least 100 different bodies simultaneously. It sounds demented. So there he was doing exactly that. It fits with the teaching. It's all in the teachings. Okay, I'm telling stories, that's all. I love that story. That's the result of Tong Len. Automatic. He trained himself, programmed his mind. So before we have lunch, I want to look at this word self-cherishing. I haven't said it much. So this is the really interesting point. In all the first stages of practice, which we share with the Hinayana path, the main problem is attachment, this bottomless pit, emotional hunger, the main voice of ego grasping. It doesn't feel like enough. It's always wanting more, but never feels like I've got enough. That then manipulates and controls and grasps and exaggerates and is a vampire. If you had that mostly in your relationship, you would eat your boyfriend for breakfast and chuck out the bones. You understand? So luckily we've got a little bit of love and compassion to mitigate it, to calm it down. So now that's the main problem. And so, in Buddha's terms, in the Four Noble Truths, now you get to the compassion wing, they frame the enemy differently. And it's called, as we'd call it very simply, selfishness. Now, we don't mind admitting to attachment, but we don't like admitting to selfishness. You understand? And we all know what selfish means: self-cherishing, narcissistic, your word, whatever you said, self-absorbed. In other words, it's the result of having attachment. If you've got mainly attachment to get what I want, which is what by definition it is, and you haven't got that much love and compassion, that's when you'd have enormous self-cherishing, only thinking of me, seeing the whole world in reference to how it can help me. And that's, in other words, self-cherishing is a consequence of attachment. Get it my point? And that's the main enemy here, because the reverse of attachment is bodhicitta. That's the point. The exact reverse of self-cherishing. They call it self-cherishing. Call it selfishness. I remember a woman in Vermont who came to the course we were doing there. She read that it was all about giving up, was learning about self-cherishing. And she hadn't heard any Buddhist teaching. She thought, oh, that's lovely. I'd love to cherish myself better. She got a big shock when she heard it meant selfishness. But I think it's a sweet word, self-cherishing. It's kind of nice, But it means putting me first. And that's why bodhicitta is literally that paradigm shift when you finally got bodhicitta, when literally all the time others are first. So that's why we've got to try to practice. That's exactly the whole point of this entire path, all these 8 verses. Slowly making this shift. And we can see how hard it is. We might be really nice people. We aren't reasonably nice people. But to actually say, to have it genuine, if it's not your beloved baby, but a stranger like those porters, this spontaneous response, that I'd rather suffer than them. And it's not a drama queen, oh, I'm going to suffer. Look at me suffering. Look at me falling off the cliff for others. No, not like that. It's genuine. So you can't have it. You can't pretend to have it, but you aim for it. I mean, Federer couldn't pretend to be as good as Wimbledon when he's only training, but he aimed for it. Same here. So why don't we have some lunch? Okay, people? 90 minutes will work again, I think, like yesterday. Yeah, 90 minutes works. Sorry, we can't give you the soup and everything we got here that Dawn and Christopher have made, but you can have your own lunch. All right, people? So we'll see you in 90 minutes, about, say, 12:30, 1:32, 2 p.m. or so, roughly speaking, okay? Thank you, precious people. Bye.